What's up, everybody? Mr. Forrest back with another episode of Big Truths. Guys, I was away last week because it was like a fluky thing. I got sick on a Friday night, and I was sick all weekend. And by Tuesday, I started feeling a little bit better, so I started getting up and moving around, and I washed some dishes, and I was folding laundry. And as I was folding laundry, it was like, bing! In my lower back, my back went out, and I was like, ah! And I couldn't even stand up straight, and it was really bad. So I didn't even come to Calvary Kids Wednesday, so I didn't preach last week. So that's why we didn't have a video last week, and so I've been struggling with being sick and my back being out. But guys, I'm back. I'm ready to roll. And this week, we're going to talk about pain and suffering in the world. Let's kick things off by reading a passage of Scripture. Job 42, 1 and 2. Then Job answered Yahweh and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Guys, I hate pain and suffering. I remember when I was super tiny, my uncle had my cousin by the hands and was swinging him around, so like his feet were like, whoo, whoo, and I walked around a corner. And right when I walked around the corner, his feet clocked me in the head, and it knocked me out, and it gave me a concussion. On another incident, I was climbing up my treehouse. Now, my dad had built a treehouse in the big tree in my grandma's backyard. And not only did he build the treehouse, he built the big, heavy wooden ladder that went up to the main platform in the treehouse. Well, sometimes he would take the ladder and put it up on top of the platform. And I'm not sure why he did that, but because I could still get up, and we could all still get up. There were a couple 2x4s that made an X near the back, and we climbed those 2x4s and get to the top. And that's what I was doing. I was climbing the 2x4s, and I got to the top of the platform, and I reached my hand up to pull myself up. But when I reached up, I grabbed the ladder instead of the platform, and it gave, and down I went, falling, and then wham, I landed on my back. I opened my eyes just in time to see that big, heavy wooden ladder go, hit me in the head, knocked me out. Another concussion. And it was super weird because I could remember things. Like when I woke up, I could remember all kinds of things, but I couldn't remember how I fell or how I got knocked out. And it took like 3 months before I could remember what exactly happened. And I tried to like rework it in my head so many times it didn't work. I believe it was the summer before my 3rd grade year. Some new kittens were born near where my dad worked. And there was a big stack of particle board leaning against the wall. And the kittens were born between the wall and the stack of particle boards. And I wanted to see the kittens, so I started pulling the particle board back, but I didn't realize how heavy it was. It was about 1,000 pounds of particle board. And as I pulled it, it started coming down on me. And I saw it coming down, and I started freaking out, so I turned to run. And my foot was up like this, and the boards came down and crushed my foot, my heel, my toes, messed my foot up, my growth plates, everything. My foot did not grow because of this injury for like 2 years. So to this day, my right foot is like a couple inches shorter than my left foot. It's really quite funny, and that's why I can't ski. Whoa. But I remember I was yelling. I was pinned down, and I was yelling for help. I remember how bad it hurt. And a couple teenage boys came in, and both of the boys lifted the boards just enough for me to scoop my foot out. And then my dad put me in his truck and drove me to the emergency room. I remember how much pain I was feeling all the way to the emergency room. I remember one time I stepped on a piece of glass that went up into my foot, and I tried to dig it out myself. Like I remember getting a butter knife, and I got some of it out, but some of it was deep inside, and it kept bothering me. So my dad took me to the doctor, and they had to dig it out. So to numb the area, they had to give me a shot, like in the wound where the glass was. And I remember that being one of the most painful things I had ever experienced in my whole life. One time, my sister and my friend Julie and I went down to the beach, and we were going to spend all day at the beach, morning till evening. And we brought a lunch and stuff, and our parents were like, don't forget to put sunscreen on. And we're like, okay. Well, we forgot. And we went play in the water, and at noon, it was like noon, we got out to eat lunch. and we put sunscreen on then. But we were already wet, and it didn't even take, and it didn't even work. And by the time we got home, we were head to toe lobster sunburned. But it got worse. That night, we started getting blisters all over our whole bodies. Julie even got a blister on her eye. Our eyes were even sunburned. Like, you could see a tan line when we went like this. It was really bad. And in the middle of the night, I guess it was the next night or maybe the night after that when the blisters started to burst, I remember waking up and feeling something wet on my face. One of the blisters had burst, and it was the discharge. And I went to the bathroom to get a Kleenex just to dab at it. And when I got the Kleenex, I wiped like this, and my skin was so tender from the sunburn that just wiping with a Kleenex tore my skin. I remember how bad that hurt, how much pain I was in for those few days that I was dealing with those blisters from the sunburn. I remember when I was a kid falling off my bike and skinning my knees, how much that hurt. I remember getting beat up as a kid for being a Christian. I don't like pain, and I've never liked pain. When my back went out last week, that was not fun. I did not like the pain. And I've always asked, why is there pain and suffering in the world? And there are things that happen that are more serious than a bad sunburn or than a broken foot or skinned knees. Things like the civil war in Syria and millions of people fleeing the country and having nowhere to go and not having food or water or fresh clothes and getting diseases and getting sick and even dying. These are serious tragedies. And people for thousands of years have always wondered, why is there pain and suffering in the world? And our story today goes back in time thousands of years. Long before Jesus came to earth. Long before King David lived. Even before Moses lived. There was a man named Job. And I want you to imagine with me today, almost like we were watching a movie. And almost like the beginning of the movie, right when the credits are over, pan over and show this guy Job and his household. You see, Job was the richest man in the Near East at that time. And as the camera pans, we see his big, beautiful houses, and we see his servants working everywhere. We see all that he had: 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, 500 cows and 500 female donkeys, servants everywhere, a huge house, a big family, a wife and 7 sons and 3 daughters, and everything's going fine. And Job loved God. And then imagine it's like the camera pans up and up and up and up and up, all the way to heaven. And in heaven, we see Yahweh. And standing before Yahweh is Satan. Now, the word Satan means adversary or enemy. And Yahweh says to Satan, "Where you been?" And Satan says, "I've been everywhere, roaming the whole earth." And Yahweh says, "Have you considered my servant Job, how he loves me and he's righteous?" And Satan goes, "Yeah, right. Look how much you've blessed him. Look how much you've protected him. Stop protecting him, take away what he has, and he will curse you to your face." And Yahweh says, "Fine. You can take away anything you want, but don't touch Job." It's like the camera cuts away from heaven, and the next scene is back on earth. And Job is in his house, doing whatever Job happened to be doing that day. And suddenly, a messenger comes running into the house. And he's out of breath. And he's trying to explain. And he said, "Your cows were plowing the field, and the donkeys were next to them. And the Sabians came and stole them all and killed all your servants who were watching them, and I'm the only one who escaped." And it was like a punch to the gut, and Job was like, "What?" But before that servant even had a chance to finish, another servant comes running in. Job, lightning," and he's all out of breath, "lightning struck and started a huge fire, and it killed all your sheep and all your servants, and I'm the only one who escaped to tell you about it." And Job's knees buckled, and he's trying to think, wait, what is going on? How is this even possible? And then another servant comes running in, Job. And Job's thinking, how can this get any worse? And he said, the Chaldeans came. The Chaldeans came and they stole your camels. They stole your camels and they killed your servants. And I'm the only one who escaped. And Job's like, I gotta sit down. And he said, this can't get any worse. And then it did. One final servant came in. And he said, Job, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your kids, they were all having a feast in your oldest son's house. The wind came and blew the support beams down. The roof collapsed. And all your kids are dead. And Job must have felt like a boxer who just got hit with a jab, 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 right hook, knockout blow. Job's heart was broken. He was crushed. Job probably wished that it was all a dream and that he would wake up and everything would be fine. He probably wanted to run away and escape, but he couldn't. This was real and this was happening, and Job was heartbroken. He gets up and he tears his robe, which was an ancient sign of mourning or deep emotion, sorrow. He shaves his head. He falls on his face and he worships, and he says something that every time I hear it makes me want to cry. He says, Yahweh gives and Yahweh has taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. And scene. The next scene takes place back in heaven again. And once again we see Satan before Yahweh. And Yahweh says, where you been? And Satan says, well, I've been all over the place, roaming the whole earth. And Yahweh says, have you considered my servant Job? How he's righteous and he loves me. And Satan goes, yeah, right. He only serves you because you've never harmed him personally. Let me hurt him and he will curse you to your face. And Yahweh says, fine, go ahead. But you may not kill him. Satan cuts away, back down to earth, where we see Job, sitting on a pile of dung, with ashes on his head, weeping for the loss of his children and his servants, weeping because of the catastrophe and calamity that has hit his household. This time he has painful sores all over his body, boils. And we see him taking sharp, broken pieces of pottery and scraping his skin. Maybe he was doing that because it itched so badly. Maybe he was doing that because of the pressure in the boils, and scraping them would cause them to burst and release that pressure. We're not sure. But he was scraping himself with sharp pottery, which probably is a sign that he was in great pain of some kind. And his wife, his bitter wife, says, why don't you just curse God and die? Essentially, she asks him to commit suicide. Then his 3 friends show up, and eventually 4, and basically tell him all this stuff is happening because of something Job did. In other words, it's Job's fault that all of this is happening. Then they get into this big argument over what God was thinking. And the truth is, none of those guys knew what God was thinking. And finally, after they had all blown their smoke, God appears in a whirlwind and he speaks to Job, in a sense, face to face. And he says, Job, you see the sun, moon, and the stars? You see the universe? I made that. You see the animals, the hawks? Do you see the mountain goats? Do you see the largest land creatures and the largest sea creatures? I made that. Where were you when I made all of this? And Job can't speak. He just claps his hand over his mouth. Yahweh then reminds Job that he is in control of everything he made. And for so long, Job had these questions like, God, why is this happening? And he never found out the answers. God never told him why he did what he did. But suddenly, the question why wasn't so important anymore. And Job has this face-to-face experience with Yahweh. And he learns that his relationship with Yahweh is far more important than why any of this stuff happened. So, here's what we can learn. Number one, we don't always get answers as to why this is happening. And we all ask the question, why is this happening? When bad things happen and we're in pain and suffering, or other people are in pain or suffering, we all ask that question, why? But God is not obligated to answer us. And most of the time, we don't get answers. I never found out why our first two babies died when they were in Mrs. Forrest's tummy. I never got answers as to why, when I was 24 years old, I was in a bad accident and I didn't walk for 9 months. And some of the doctors said, you might never walk again. That was the longest 9 months of my life. And I was constantly asking God, why? Why did this happen? What are you doing? What's going on? And I never got an answer. But that's okay. Here's why. That leads us into the second thing that we can learn. That is, Yahweh is in complete control. I want to tell you guys a very important word. That word is sovereign. That means God is in complete control all the time. He always has been. He always will be. Now, God is not an old man with a long beard in a rocking chair, watching, hoping everything turns out, hoping the good guys win. God is not chewing his fingernails like, oh man, how's this going to play out? I don't know what's going to happen next. God isn't like a fan in the stands, who the fans are powerless. They can't go down on the court and help their team, so they just stay in the stands and clap. It's not like God's in the stands clapping for us, hoping that we win, but not involved directly. No, God is in complete control all the time. And we have to trust that. And if we don't get answers to why, we have to remind ourselves, okay, look, I don't know the why, but God's the one who's in complete control of everything, and I'm going to trust him that he knows exactly what he's doing. And the third thing that we can learn from Job's life is that God is enough. Pain and suffering draw us closer to God. C.S. Lewis says that pain's like a megaphone calling God's children closer to him. When Job went through all of this, it was terrible and it hurt and he got no answers and he never found out about that conversation that Yahweh had with Satan. And he never found out what God's plan was in the long run. And things ended up good in the end. But he didn't know they would end up good in the end. God restored his riches and doubled it. God restored his kid, gave him a whole set of kids, and 7 more sons and 3 more daughters, and everything. There was a happy ending, but he didn't know it was going to be a happy ending. But what did happen through all of this is he had a face-to-face encounter with God. The God who loved him so much. And God is always enough. Guys, you are going to go through hard times. There will be pain and suffering. There are kids in our ministry right now whose mom has cancer. That's tough. That's not easy. We might not get answers. But let me encourage you with this. God is so good, and he's in control, and he has a plan, and God is always enough. He's always enough. This world isn't all that there is. There's so much more than this world. We get to be with him forever. Guys, God satisfies every need that we have because God is enough. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Big Truths. Our memory verse this week is Job 1:21. Yahweh gave, and Yahweh has taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. I hope this is helpful in your life. And guys, sometime read the book of Job. It's an incredible book. It's one really long poem. And a lot of the book is Job and his three friends arguing back and forth about what they think God is thinking. But the overall story of the book of Job is quite incredible. And we need to remember this when we're going through hard times. And we're not going to always understand what God's doing or get answers to our questions. But God does know what he's doing. He does have a plan. He loves you very much. And in the end, he is enough. And he's drawing us closer to himself. Guys, I will see you next week. But until then, Mr. Forrest out.